The small Byzantine church stood silent as it had for centuries, guardian of secrets buried deep within Athens' ancient soil. None could have predicted what lay beneath the worn marble floors of Agios Eleftherios, a discovery that would forever change the understanding of Athens' past. Athens in the spring of 1918 was a city caught between worlds. The Great War raged across Europe, but Greece's ancient capital maintained a tentative peace despite the political upheaval that had gripped the nation. The little Byzantine church of Agios Eleftherios stood in the shadow of the metropolitan cathedral, its modest facade belying its historical significance. It was here that Ilias Lambros, a respected archaeologist from the University of Athens, found himself one cool March morning. Clipboard in hand, spectacles perched precariously on his aquiline nose. At 42, Ilias had dedicated his life to uncovering the secrets of Greece's past. The son of a fisherman from Piraeus, he had fought against his humble beginnings to become one of the most respected scholars in the field of Byzantine archaeology. His weathered hands, calloused from years of careful excavation, traced the ancient stonework as he conducted what was meant to be a routine architectural survey of the church, which locals affectionately called the Little Cathedral. The Metropolitan had granted him permission to document the church's features for historical preservation, a simple task that should have taken no more than a few days. As Ilias measured the dimensions of the nave, he noticed something peculiar about the worn marble floor. Near the altar, several stones seemed misaligned, creating a subtle pattern that differed from the rest of the carefully laid flooring. His trained eye recognized the incongruity immediately. This was no random settling of ancient stones, but deliberate human handiwork. Kneeling down, he ran his fingers along the seams where the marble met, feeling a distinct draft emanating from below. Curious, he muttered to himself, marking the anomaly in his notebook. That evening, as the spring sun dipped below the Athenian skyline, Ilias returned to his cluttered office at the university, his mind preoccupied with the floor of Agios Eleftherios. He pored over historical documents related to the church, learning that it had been built in the 12th century, possibly atop an ancient temple dedicated to Eileithia, the goddess of childbirth. Such palimpsests were common in Athens. Christian churches built upon pagan foundations, each layer telling a different chapter of the city's long history. Subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from. The next morning, Ilias arrived at the church before dawn, carrying a small lantern and basic tools. The caretaker, an elderly man with a silver beard who had known Ilias for years, greeted him with a knowing nod. "Be careful with our little church, Professor. Some say the stones themselves have ears," he warned with a cryptic smile before shuffling away. Ilias dismissed the superstitious comment and set to work examining the floor more closely. After several hours of careful inspection, Ilias discovered what appeared to be a concealed trapdoor, cleverly disguised within the marble flooring. The edges had been sealed with ancient mortar, suggesting it had remained unopened for centuries. Excitement coursed through him. This was potentially a significant find, perhaps a crypt or storage area that had been forgotten with time. He debated whether to open it himself or report it to the archaeological authorities, but curiosity overcame caution. Using a chisel and hammer, Ilias carefully worked at the sealed edges, taking pains not to damage the historical stonework. The sound of metal striking stone echoed through the empty church, an oddly profane sound in such a sacred space. After nearly an hour of painstaking work, he felt the stone loosen. With a final push, the marble slab shifted, revealing a yawning darkness below and releasing a gust of stale ancient air that made Ilias cough and step back. The opening revealed a narrow stone staircase descending into darkness. Elias's heart raced with scholarly excitement. Underground chambers beneath churches often contained tombs of important religious figures or hidden treasures protected from invaders throughout the centuries. Holding his lantern aloft, he peered down the stairs, the light barely penetrating the encompassing blackness. The steps appeared solid, though worn smooth by long-forgotten footsteps. Before descending, Elias knew he needed assistance and documentation. He hastily scribbled a note to the Department of Antiquities, requesting an immediate archaeological team. He handed the message to the church caretaker with instructions to deliver it urgently. "Tell them Professor Lambros has discovered a subsurface chamber beneath Αγίου Ελευθερίου that requires immediate investigation," he instructed, barely containing his excitement. While waiting for an official response, Elias could not resist making preliminary observations. He carefully descended the first few steps, noting the construction technique typical of Byzantine craftsmanship, but with elements that suggested even earlier origins. The staircase spiraled downward, disappearing into the darkness beyond his lantern's reach. The air grew cooler and heavier with each step, carrying an unusual scent. Not just the expected mustiness of an ancient sealed chamber, but something else he couldn't quite identify. As twilight fell, a young woman hurried through the church doors, her footsteps echoing on the marble floor. Eudokia Markopoulos, a newly graduated archaeology student, had been sent in response to Elias's urgent message. At 23, she was brilliant and ambitious, one of the few women in the field determined to make her mark despite the societal limitations placed on her gender. "Professor Lambros," she called out, her voice carrying in the sacred space, "the department sent me to document your finding before the full team arrives tomorrow." Elias emerged from the stairwell, dust covering his clothes, his eyes alight with discovery. "Miss Markopoulos," he acknowledged, surprised but not displeased. He had taught her in several courses and recognized her exceptional analytical mind. "I expected Papadakis or one of the senior archaeologists." Eudokia straightened her posture, clutching her notebook tightly. "They're all at the Kerameikos excavation. I was the only one available who's familiar with Byzantine architecture," she replied with quiet confidence. Elias nodded, accepting the explanation. "Very well. You've arrived just in time. I believe we've discovered something of great significance." Little did either of them know that their lives and understanding of Athens' history were about to change forever. The following morning arrived with a clarity typical of Athenian spring. The Acropolis bathed in golden light, visible from the steps of Αγίου Ελευθερίου. Elias and Eudokia met early, both having spent a restless night contemplating what might lie beneath the church. They had agreed to wait for the official excavation team before venturing deeply into the underground chamber, but would conduct preliminary documentation of the entrance and upper stairwell. Eudokia had brought proper equipment, better lanterns, measuring tools, a camera, and notebooks for detailed recording. "Professor Lambros, I've been researching the history of this site," Eudokia said as they prepared their equipment. "The church was built around 1150 AD, but historical records suggest unusual circumstances surrounding its construction." She opened a folder containing photocopied manuscripts. According to these accounts, the builders reported strange sounds coming from the ground during construction, which they attributed to the ancient spirits of the site. The patriarch at the time ordered special prayers and rituals before work could continue. Elias examined the documents with interest. Folk superstitions were common in the Byzantine era, but such specific mentions in official building records are unusual, he noted, adjusting his spectacles. What's even more interesting is that the church is built on a slight elevation compared to surrounding structures of the same period. This suggests they may have built on top of a pre-existing structure rather than leveling it, contrary to common practice of the time. With methodical precision, they began documenting the discovered entrance. Eudokia photographed the trapdoor and surrounding area, while Ilias measured the dimensions of the opening and the construction of the upper stairwell. The stairs descended in a spiral, carved from limestone that was different from the marble used in the church's construction, suggesting the underground structure predated the Byzantine church significantly. Subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from. Midday came and went, with no sign of the promised archaeological team. Ilias received a message that due to unexpected discoveries at Kerameikos, the team would be delayed until the following day. He and Eudokia exchanged glances, both thinking the same thing. They had an unexpected opportunity to explore further. "We should proceed with caution," Ilias said, trying to sound responsible despite his obvious excitement. "We'll document as we go, maintain a clear path back to the entrance, and retreat at the first sign of structural instability." Eudokia nodded eagerly, already gathering additional supplies. "I've brought extra batteries for the lanterns, water, and basic first aid," she said, revealing her thorough preparation. "I also took the liberty of bringing these." She handed Ilias a small notebook with a grid pattern. "For mapping. My father taught me spelunking techniques when I was younger." Ilias raised an eyebrow, impressed by her foresight. Despite her youth, Eudokia demonstrated a level of preparation that put his hasty investigation of the previous day to shame. With lanterns casting long shadows before them, they began their descent. The spiral staircase continued downward for approximately 30 steps before opening into a small antechamber. The walls were lined with faded frescoes depicting biblical scenes, but with unusual elements that immediately caught Ilias's attention. "These are not standard Byzantine iconography," he murmured, holding his lantern closer to examine the images. The figures were elongated in the Byzantine style, but among the traditional saints were symbols and creatures that seemed out of place in Christian art. Symbols that reminded Ilias of much older, pagan traditions. Eudokia carefully photographed each wall of the antechamber, while Ilias made notes about the anomalous imagery. "Professor, look at this," she said, pointing to a particular section where the plaster had crumbled away. Beneath the Christian fresco was another layer of artwork, clearly older and in a distinctly different style. "It appears this chamber was repurposed. The original artwork was plastered over and replaced with Christian imagery," Ilias concluded, excitement evident in his voice. Beyond the antechamber lay a corridor lined with niches carved into the walls. Each niche contained ceramic vessels of various sizes, many still sealed with wax. "Careful," Ilias warned, as Eudokia reached toward one. "These could contain anything from holy oil to human remains. We should document their position before disturbing any of them." They methodically photographed and mapped the location of each vessel, noting the strange symbols etched into some of the containers. Symbols that matched certain elements in the hidden layer of the frescoes. The corridor eventually opened into a larger chamber that took both archaeologists by surprise. Unlike the antechamber, with its Christian modifications, this room appeared untouched since its original creation. The circular space was approximately 5 meters in diameter, with a domed ceiling supported by columns that combined elements of classical Greek and Roman design. The walls between the columns contained shelves carved from the living rock, filled with scrolls, codices, and artifacts that made Ilias's scholarly heart race. "This is extraordinary," Eudokia whispered, her voice filled with awe. "A hidden library that appears to have remained sealed for centuries." Ilias approached one of the shelves with reverence, carefully examining a scroll case without removing it from its resting place. The case bore inscriptions in ancient Greek, but with linguistic elements he didn't immediately recognize. "These texts may represent a synthesis of belief systems," he theorized. "Perhaps this was a repository for knowledge considered unorthodox by later religious authorities." As they explored the chamber, their lanterns revealed a circular mosaic on the floor at the center of the room. The intricate design depicted what appeared to be a map, not of the physical world, but of celestial bodies arranged in unfamiliar patterns. At the center of the mosaic was a raised stone platform with a rectangular depression, as if designed to hold something important that was no longer present. Surrounding the platform were inscriptions in several ancient languages, some recognizable to Elias, others completely unknown. While Eudokia methodically documented the mosaic, Elias noticed something unusual about one of the columns. Unlike the others, which were purely structural, this column had a series of grooves spiraling around its surface, forming what appeared to be a continuous line from floor to ceiling. Following the groove with his finger, he discovered that a section of the column could be rotated. With a mixture of scholarly caution and irrepressible curiosity, he slowly turned the movable section. A deep, rumbling sound reverberated through the chamber as a previously invisible doorway opened in the wall between two bookshelves. Dust and stale air billowed out from the newly revealed passage, causing both archaeologists to step back, coughing. When the air cleared, their lanterns revealed yet another staircase, this one descending even deeper beneath the church. The steps were different from the Byzantine construction above. Cruder, older, with symbols carved into each riser that Elias recognized from pre-Christian Greek mystery cults. "We should wait for the team," Eudokia said, though her voice betrayed her desire to continue. Elias nodded reluctantly, knowing she was right. "We'll document what we've found so far and seal the chamber until proper excavation protocols can be established," he agreed. But as they turned to leave, a faint sound echoed up from the stairwell. A sound like distant chanting, so quiet they might have imagined it, yet distinct enough to stop them in their tracks. They looked at each other, the same question in both their eyes. What secrets lay even deeper beneath one of Athens's most unassuming churches? The archaeological team arrived the following morning, transforming the quiet church into a hub of scientific activity. Equipment, lights, and recording devices were carefully transported down the narrow staircase. Professor Papadakis, the head of the department, listened intently as Elias and Eudokia reported their discoveries, his initial skepticism giving way to genuine excitement. "If what you've described is accurate," the older man said, stroking his white beard, "this could be one of the most significant finds in Athens since the excavation of the Agora." While the team began their systematic documentation of the antechamber and library, Elias pulled Eudokia aside. "Did you include the sound we heard in your report?" he asked quietly. She shook her head, looking slightly embarrassed. "I thought perhaps it was just the wind through some unknown ventilation shaft, or even our imagination. It seemed too inexplicable to mention without evidence." Elias nodded, understanding her scientific caution. "I made the same decision. But I cannot stop thinking about it. There was something familiar about those sounds, like a liturgy, but older." As the day progressed, experts in various fields examined different aspects of the discovery. A ceramics specialist carefully extracted one of the sealed vessels for analysis, while epigraphers made rubbings of the strange inscriptions. A historian of Byzantine art photographed the frescoes in the antechamber, expressing particular interest in the hidden layer beneath the Christian imagery. This underlying iconography shows elements of Orphic symbolism, she explained, pointing to particular motifs. These mystery cults were supposed to have been eradicated centuries before the Christian era. Subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from. By late afternoon, Professor Papadakis had organized the team into specialized groups, assigning areas of focus for the coming days. "Lambros, you and Miss Markopoulos discovered this site. I want you to lead the exploration of the lower level, the staircase you found beyond the hidden door. Take Stephanopoulos and Demetriou with you for safety." Ilias tried to hide his satisfaction at being assigned exactly what he wanted. Eudokia, standing beside him, managed to maintain her professional composure, but her eyes betrayed her excitement. Before their descent, they equipped themselves properly: better lighting, safety harnesses, communication devices to maintain contact with the surface team, and specialized cameras for documenting in low-light conditions. Stephanopoulos, a structural engineer specializing in ancient architecture, would assess the stability of the passage as they proceeded. Demetriou, an expert in ancient languages, would document and provide preliminary translations of any inscriptions they encountered. The second staircase descended much deeper than the first, leading them approximately 20 meters below the church. The temperature dropped noticeably as they descended, and the air took on a peculiar quality, not stale as one might expect in a sealed chamber, but somehow fresh, with subtle currents suggesting connection to other spaces. The stairs eventually opened into a roughly hewn tunnel that showed signs of different construction periods, as if it had been expanded and modified over many centuries. The tunnel extended beyond the range of their lights, disappearing into darkness. As they advanced cautiously, Stephanopoulos examined the construction techniques. "The oldest sections appear to date from the classical Greek period," he observed, "but there are modifications from almost every subsequent era: Hellenistic, Roman, Byzantine, even Ottoman. This passage has been known and used for over 2,000 years, yet somehow remained secret." This revelation stunned the group into momentary silence. How could such an extensive underground complex have remained hidden throughout Athens' well-documented history? After walking for approximately 200 meters, they reached a junction where the tunnel branched in 3 directions. Demetriou examined inscriptions carved above each passage. "This is fascinating," he muttered, tracing the ancient letters with his finger. "The left passage is marked with a phrase that translates roughly as path of remembering. The right is path of forgetting. And the central passage—" He hesitated, consulting his notes. "The central one says path of knowing what should not be known." Ilias and Eudokia exchanged glances. Such cryptic designations were consistent with mystery cult practices, where initiates would undergo symbolic journeys representing spiritual transformation. "We should start with the central path," Ilias suggested. "Based on its designation, it may lead to the heart of whatever purpose this complex served." The others agreed, though Stephanopoulos insisted on securing a guide rope to mark their path back to the junction. As they proceeded down the central tunnel, the rough-hewn walls gave way to carefully dressed stone blocks fitted with remarkable precision. The passage widened gradually until it opened into a vast underground chamber that left them speechless. Their powerful lights could barely reach the far walls of the space, which appeared to be a perfect circle, approximately 30 meters in diameter. The ceiling rose in a dome, decorated with a mosaic depicting the night sky, not as abstract art, but as an astronomical map of remarkable accuracy. The chamber's floor was equally impressive, a vast circular mosaic depicting an elaborate labyrinth design in black, white, and red stone. At regular intervals around the perimeter stood 12 pillars, each carved to represent a different figure. Demetriou moved quickly from one to another, his excitement growing. "These represent the 12 Olympian gods, but with attributes and symbols I've never seen in conventional depictions. They're shown not as divine figures, but as teachers or guides." At the center of the labyrinth stood a raised circular platform with a stone altar. Unlike Christian altars, this one had channels carved into its surface leading to a central basin. Ilias approached it carefully, aware of its likely purpose in ancient rituals. This was designed for liquid offerings, he explained to Eudokia, who was photographing everything with methodical precision. In mystery cults, such offerings could be wine, oil, honey, or... He hesitated. In some cases, blood. Eudokia's documentation suddenly stopped as she lowered her camera, staring at something beyond the altar. "Professor," she called, her voice unusually tense, "there's someone here." The team swung their lights toward where she was pointing. Seated on a stone bench against the far wall, partially obscured in shadow, was what appeared to be a human figure. For a moment, Elias thought they had discovered a statue, but as they approached cautiously, the truth became apparent, and far more disturbing. The figure was indeed human, or had been. It was the desiccated remains of a man in religious garments that appeared to be from the early 20th century, perhaps from around the same time as their current year, 1918. He sat upright, as if in meditation, his hands folded in his lap, holding an ancient codex. His features, though shrunken with desiccation, showed no signs of distress or struggle. It appeared he had come here deliberately and simply remained. Demetriou knelt to examine the codex without disturbing it. "This is written in a form of Greek I've never encountered," he said with professional amazement. "It contains elements of ancient Koine, but with structures and vocabulary that seem almost artificially constructed, as if designed to express concepts for which normal language was insufficient." As the linguist continued his examination, Eudokia noticed something clutched in the figure's right hand, a folded paper that looked much newer than the ancient codex. With extreme care, using archival tweezers, she extracted the paper. It was a letter dated March 1917, just 1 year earlier. Written in modern Greek, it began, "To whoever finds me, know that I, Father Nikolaos Ambrosios, came here willingly to be the final guardian. What sleeps beneath must never awaken. The seals are weakening. War above has stirred what lies below. I pray my sacrifice strengthens the boundary, at least for a time." The letter continued with references to those who came before and the ancient pact, ending with a warning that sent chills through the entire team. If you are reading this, the boundary may already be failing. Listen for the chanting. If it grows stronger, seal this place and flee. The mood in the chamber shifted instantly, from scholarly excitement to unease. As if responding to the reading of the letter, the subtle air currents in the chamber changed direction, now flowing not from the entrance tunnel, but from the far side of the room, where a passageway none of them had noticed before stood partially concealed behind one of the pillars. And from that passage came the faintest sound, rhythmic chanting in a language none of them recognized, exactly like what Elias and Eudokia had heard the previous day, but slightly louder, slightly clearer. Stephanopoulos, the most pragmatic of the group, broke the tense silence. "We should return to the surface and report what we've found. This requires careful consideration and possibly specialized expertise beyond archaeology." Demetriou nodded in agreement, already packing his notes with uncharacteristic haste, but Elias stood transfixed, staring at the hidden passage. "That sound," he whispered. "I know it from somewhere." Eudokia placed a hand on his arm. "Professor Lambros, we should go. Whatever this is, it feels like we're intruding on something we don't understand." Before they could depart, a deep vibration passed through the chamber, causing dust to drift down from the domed ceiling. The chanting grew momentarily louder, then faded again to its previous level. The 4 archaeologists looked at each other, a unanimous decision reflected in their eyes. Whatever secrets remained in the deepest levels beneath Agios Eleftherios, they would need to return better prepared, both scientifically and perhaps spiritually, before proceeding further. As they retraced their steps toward the surface, Elias couldn't shake the feeling that they hadn't discovered the underground chambers by accident. Somehow, after centuries of secrecy, the chambers had revealed themselves precisely when they were meant to be found. The discovery beneath Αγίου Ελευθερίου became both the talk of the academic community and a closely guarded secret. The Greek government, already dealing with the complexities of World War I and its own internal political turmoil, insisted on discretion. Only select scholars were granted access to the site, and a military guard was posted at the church to prevent unauthorized exploration. Elias and Eudokia found themselves at the center of a growing research team, their names forever linked to what was quickly becoming known in hushed academic circles as the Athenian Revelation. 3 days after their initial exploration of the ritual chamber, Elias sat in his university office surrounded by books on ancient mystery cults, Byzantine religious practices, and obscure historical accounts of underground Athens. His desk was buried under maps, comparing the known ancient city with its modern counterpart, trying to determine if other structures might connect to the network they'd discovered. Eudokia entered with a tray of coffee and a stack of newly arrived documents from archives in Constantinople. "Any progress with the texts from the library chamber?" she asked, setting down the coffee. Elias sighed, removing his spectacles to rub his tired eyes. "The scrolls are in remarkably good condition due to the stable environment, but the content—" He trailed off, searching for words. "It's as if they were written by people who experienced a different reality than what history records. They describe Athens as not just a city of philosophers and politics, but as a center for what they call the management of thresholds." Eudokia sat down across from him, her brow furrowed. "Thresholds to what?" Elias shook his head. "That's what's puzzling. The texts use metaphors and allegories rather than direct statements. They speak of that which lies beneath all cities but sleeps deepest under Athens, and the ancient ones who dream of returning. It could be interpreted as religious symbolism, or—" He hesitated, aware of how it would sound, or as something more literal. "Subscribe to the channel and comment which city you're watching from." Before Eudokia could respond, there was a knock at the door. Professor Papadakis entered, accompanied by an elderly man neither of them recognized. "Lambros, Miss Markopoulos, allow me to introduce Father Theophilos Konstantinou. He's a theological historian from Mount Athos, who specializes in pre-Orthodox Christian practices in Greece. I've briefed him on our discovery, and he has some insights that might be valuable." The old priest nodded politely. His eyes sharp despite his advanced years, Father Theophilos spoke softly but with authority. "What you have discovered is not unknown to certain circles within the Church. There have always been rumors of a special responsibility carried by certain religious orders in Athens." He placed an ancient leather-bound manuscript on Elias's desk. "This is from our private archives. Never published. It details the founding of a secret brotherhood in the 4th century, charged with maintaining certain boundaries in Athens and several other ancient cities." Elias opened the manuscript carefully. The text was in medieval Greek, with illustrations showing robed figures performing rituals in underground chambers, remarkably similar to what they had discovered. "This brotherhood," Father Theophilos continued, "was officially disbanded during the Ottoman period, but there are indications it continued to operate quietly, recruiting members from both clergy and lay people. The priest you found in the chamber, Father Nikolaos, was known to me in my youth as a scholar of unusual interests. He disappeared in 1917, allegedly to join a monastery in Meteora. Now we know his true purpose." Eudokia, who had been studying the manuscript illustrations, looked up sharply. "These rituals, they're designed to contain something, aren't they? Not worship, but imprisonment." Father Theophilos nodded gravely. "Your perception is correct, young lady. According to these traditions, Athens was built where it stands not just for defense or access to water, but because something needed to be managed. The ancient Greeks built their temples strategically, creating a network of sacred geometry across the landscape. When Christianity came, churches were placed on these same sites, continuing the work through different rituals, but for the same purpose. Professor Papadakis, who had remained silent during this explanation, finally spoke. This is all very fascinating from a cultural, historical perspective, but surely you don't suggest we take these supernatural elements seriously. His tone was respectful, but skeptical. Father Theophilos merely smiled. I merely present what our records indicate. How you interpret them is your choice. However, he added, his voice dropping slightly, I would be interested to know if any of you have been experiencing unusual dreams since your discovery. The question hung in the air for a moment before Ilias and Eudokia exchanged a startled glance. Neither had mentioned it to the other, but both had indeed been experiencing vivid, disturbing dreams, visions of Athens transformed, of something vast stirring beneath the ancient soil, of chanting in languages they didn't understand, but somehow comprehended while dreaming. Father Theophilos nodded at their reaction. As I suspected, the boundary is indeed weakening. The question now is, what you intend to do about it. 2 days later, a smaller team returned to the underground chamber. Ilias and Eudokia were accompanied by Father Theophilos, who, despite his age, had insisted on seeing the site personally, and Dr. Elena Petrova, a specialist in ancient languages who had been working to translate the codex found with Father Nikolaos. They had decided against bringing Stephanopoulos or Demetriou, whose skepticism might complicate what they now understood was not merely an archaeological expedition. The chamber appeared unchanged since their last visit, the desiccated priest still in his eternal vigil, the altar untouched at the center of the labyrinth mosaic. Father Theophilos approached the remains of Father Nikolaos with reverence, making the sign of the cross before gently touching the younger priest's withered hand. He knew what was at stake, the old man murmured. The great war above disrupted the energies that maintained the boundary. He gave himself to strengthen it, but alone he could only do so much. Dr. Petrova had made significant progress with the codex. It's a manual, she explained, opening her notes. A precise description of rituals designed to maintain what it calls the separation of spheres. According to this text, what lies beneath Athens is a point of contact with something the ancient writers considered neither divine nor demonic, but fundamentally alien to human existence, something that existed before humanity and regards our reality as we might regard a dream, ephemeral and malleable. Father Theophilos nodded as if this confirmed his understanding. The most ancient gods of Greece, not the Olympians but those who came before, the chthonic deities, were possibly human attempts to comprehend these entities, personifications that made the incomprehensible slightly more manageable. He moved toward the hidden passageway from which the faint chanting still emanated. This leads deeper, to the actual boundary. The rituals were performed here, in this outer chamber, but their purpose was to maintain what lies beyond. Ilias felt a strange compulsion drawing him toward the passage, the same feeling that had nearly prevented him from leaving during their previous visit. The chanting is louder now, he observed, and it seems to respond to our presence. Indeed, the rhythm had changed subtly since they entered the chamber. As if acknowledging them, Eudokia placed a restraining hand on his arm. We agreed we would only document the outer chamber today, not proceed further without proper preparation. Dr. Petrova, who had been examining the pillars representing the 12 Olympians, called them over excitedly. Look at this inscription at the base of Zeus's pillar. It's not just decorative, it's instructions. According to this, The 12 pillars must be activated in a specific sequence to strengthen the veil between worlds. She pointed to small indentations in each pillar. These held something, perhaps gems or ritual objects, that completed a circuit of some kind. Father Theophilos opened his satchel and removed 12 small Byzantine icons, each depicting one of the Christian saints. The Brotherhood adapted the ancient practice. These replaced whatever pagan objects were originally used. With reverence, he placed one icon in the indentation on the nearest pillar, the one representing Athena. Nothing visible happened, but the chanting from beyond the hidden passage faltered momentarily, like a record skipping, before resuming at a slightly reduced volume. The demonstration was convincing enough that they quickly developed a plan. Using the Codex's instructions and Father Theophilos's knowledge, they would attempt to perform a simplified version of the ritual, not to completely restore the boundary. That would require more knowledge and possibly more people, but to temporarily strengthen it until a more permanent solution could be organized. They positioned themselves around the chamber, each assigned specific tasks based on the ancient manual. As they began the ritual, carefully following the prescribed movements and recitations, the chamber's atmosphere changed perceptibly. The air grew heavier, charged with an energy none of them could explain scientifically, but all could feel. The mosaic labyrinth on the floor seemed to shift subtly, though when any of them looked directly at a specific section, it appeared stable. The chanting beyond the passage grew more insistent, as if responding to their actions with increasing urgency. Eudokia, positioned at what the Codex called the anchor point of memory, suddenly gasped. Her eyes, when Ilias looked over in concern, had rolled back slightly, showing more white than iris. "I can see them," she whispered, her voice eerily calm despite her apparent trance state. "The ones who built this place, the ones who discovered what sleeps below. They've been maintaining this boundary for thousands of years, passing the responsibility from civilization to civilization." Her hands moved in patterns she couldn't possibly have known, completing gestures described in the Codex but not demonstrated by any of them. Following Eudokia's lead, the others found themselves similarly affected, not possessed, but accessing knowledge that seemed to flow from the chamber itself, as if the ritual had done this countless times and was guiding them through muscle memory that wasn't their own. Father Theophilos chanted in a language he had never studied. Dr. Petrova traced symbols in the air with precise movements, and Ilias found himself at the central altar, his hands hovering over the basin, drawn by an instinct he didn't understand. Without conscious decision, Ilias drew a small knife from his pocket and cut his palm, allowing several drops of blood to fall into the basin, a priest's offering to powers neither Christian nor pagan, but far older than either. As the blood touched the ancient stone, the entire chamber resonated with a single perfect note that silenced the distant chanting completely. The air pressure changed dramatically, ears popping as if they had descended deep underwater, and for a brief moment each of them experienced a vision of something vast and incomprehensible stirring in depths beyond human reckoning, before falling still again, returning to its ancient slumber. Then it was over. The four of them stood in the chamber, dazed and slightly disoriented, as if waking from a shared dream. The atmosphere had returned to normal, the strange energy dissipated. Most significantly, the chanting from beyond the hidden passage had stopped entirely. Father Theophilos was the first to recover his composure. "It is done," he said simply. "Not permanently, but we have bought time. The boundary is restored for now." In the weeks that followed, the Greek government, advised by Father Theophilos and academic consultants, including Ilias and Eudokia, established a permanent research institute dedicated to studying the chambers beneath Agios Eleftherios. The public was told a modified truth, that an important Byzantine archive had been discovered, containing valuable historical documents requiring careful preservation. The deeper chambers were quietly sealed with modern materials, supplementing the ancient barriers, and a rotating team of carefully selected individuals was tasked with monitoring and maintaining the boundary through rituals adapted for contemporary understanding. Ilias Lambros eventually published a carefully edited account of the architectural and historical aspects of the discovery, omitting the more inexplicable elements. The paper established his reputation internationally, leading to a distinguished career spanning decades of archaeological innovation. Eudokia Markopoulos, despite the gender barriers of her time, became a leading expert in religious architecture. Her first-hand experience beneath Agios Eleftherios giving her insights few others could claim. Neither of them ever spoke publicly about what they had experienced in the deepest chamber, or the strange dreams that occasionally still visited them on certain nights when the stars aligned in patterns matching the ceiling mosaic of that ancient underground space. They maintained their scholarly skepticism in professional contexts, yet both kept small Byzantine icons in their homes, placed precisely at points that would have completed a protective circle if their houses were viewed from above. And in modern Athens, tourists still visit the small Byzantine church of Agios Eleftherios, admiring its modest beauty without knowing what lies beneath their feet. Occasionally, a visitor with particular sensitivity might feel a strange vibration through the marble floor, or hear what sounds like distant chanting coming from somewhere below. Most dismiss it as imagination or acoustic tricks from the nearby Metropolitan Cathedral. Only a few recognize it for what it is, the echo of an ancient boundary between worlds, maintained through millennia by those who understand that some secrets are kept not out of ignorance, but out of profound wisdom about what humanity is ready to know.